Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. Investigators still do not have a motive for a shooting at a SunTrust bank on Wednesday in Florida. Suspect Zevin Zaver made his first court appearance today and was charged with 5 counts of homicide. Sebring Police Chief Carl Hoagland called the event tragic before describing the timeline of the shooting, saying that after the suspect called 911, operators tried to keep communications open.
He told dispatchers that he had killed 5 people in the bank. The wherewithal and the thoughts and the acts of our dispatchers were to maintain telephone contact with him until responding officers could arrive.
The 21-year-old suspect formerly worked at a correctional facility. Neighbors have said he was quiet, but a former girlfriend says he indicated he could do something like this before. On day 34 of the partial government shutdown, Senators Mark Warner and Tim Kaine draw attention to those affected. Warner saying he has a proposal to prevent any future shutdowns from lasting long.
The only folks that would actually have to feel the pain would be the legislators, their congressional staff, and the White House and the White House staff. Because I can bet you, if all of our congressional staff and all that White House staff had gone for 33 days without pay, this shutdown would be over.
Senators are voting on 2 measures today. A national defense analyst says he believes President Trump needs to confront Kim Jong-un about a report that reveals the North Korean dictator is still conducting missile and nuclear weapons development in secret. Chad Groening has more.
President Trump and Kim have agreed to meet in a second summit late next month in Vietnam. The president says his administration has made tremendous progress in negotiations with Pyongyang over ending its nuclear and missile programs. Bob McGinnis is a senior fellow for national security at the Family Research Council and author of Alliance of Evil. He is not sure about progress.
The second summit, I think, 8 months after the fact of the summit there in Singapore last June, maybe there's been progress. These sorts of things that go on behind the scenes are not well publicized. My concern, of course, is we don't know exactly what Kim Jong-un has been doing in the interim, though we haven't seen any ballistic missile tests, nor have we seen certainly a nuclear test.
And McGinnis says the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a Washington think tank, has published a report exposing an undisclosed North Korean missile base.
Talked about the Sino-Ri missile operating base, which is not one of the bases that apparently have been identified to us before as a ballistic missile test site. And then it suggests that there are 18 others as well.
McGinnis says those off-the-record sites ought to be discussed at the summit.
I think the bottom line is that Kim Jong-un continues his programs, albeit in secret.
And McGinnis says a North Korean has recently taken a trip to Beijing to get guidance from Chinese President Xi about the summit. I'm Chad Groening.
Expect to hear a lot more in the coming weeks about Texas eliminating Planned Parenthood from its Medicaid program. More from Chris Woodward.
The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals recently reversed a district court's ruling that prevented Texas from eliminating Planned Parenthood from the Medicaid program. Speaking on Washington Watch with Tony Perkins, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton called it a big win for taxpayers.
We had videos showing they clearly violated medical and ethical standards, and that because of that, they should not be qualified to get Medicaid funds.
Those videos are part of an investigation by the Center for Medical Progress showing Planned Parenthood involved in the sale of aborted baby body parts.
The Fifth Circuit sent it back to Judge Sparks in Austin, who's a federal district judge, and basically said you applied the wrong standard. So he has a chance to issue another decision, and we'll see what he does. Whatever his ruling is, do we have to appeal his ruling, or does Planned Parenthood appeal his ruling? My guess is it goes back to the Fifth Circuit. And then ultimately, whatever decision they have, whether one side or the other appeals to the U.S. Supreme Court, I mean, we could still be talking a relatively long time, over a year.
I'm Chris Woodward.
And the number of people seeking jobless benefits dropped last week to the lowest level since November 1969. American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com. I'm Rusty Pugh.
There are many ways you can listen to the shows of Urban Family Talk. One of those ways is through our very own app. Whether you have an iPhone or an Android, just go to the App Store and search for Urban Family Talk. You'll have immediate access to 24-hour programming as well as the podcast for each show. You'll be able to tune in
no matter where you are.
Speaking of tuning in, we have our own channel on another radio app called Tune In. Cool, right? Urban Family Talk is everywhere. Just download the app and take us wherever you go.
She's sharp, pointed, and insightful. This is Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Look, we're in the business of getting information to the American people, not making stars out of people that want to become contributors on CNN. And that's a lot of times what we see take place in the briefing room.
The State of the Union speech has been canceled by Nancy Pelosi because she doesn't want to hear the truth. She doesn't want the American public to hear what's going on.
We have a society in which there are an awful lot of people who have no idea that Stalin, Hitler, Mao Zedong all came to power promising the same kinds of things that Ms. Ocasio-Cortez is promising.
I want to point out that she's a socialist. She wants 7% tax rates. Those are both accurate, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay.
Democratic, though.
Democratic socialist.
And now, Stacey Washington.
Welcome into the program today. Thank you so much for being with us here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. It's been kind of a depressing news week. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. We have had what I would consider to be one of those weeks where, if you look at it just in the natural, it looks like we're not doing so good. Even with the presidency and controlling the Senate, states are doing things that they're not just repugnant. They fly in the face of what we call ourselves a moral society would do. And so that's kind of where we have to begin, isn't it? Isn't it time for us to just go ahead and admit that what the Bible says is true and we're not a moral society? We're a society full of people, and people are depraved and in need of a savior? Yeah, that's what we have to admit. So welcome to the program. We're going to talk about the president taking the high ground in the State of the Union fight. Maybe you tuned in thinking I'd be totally ticked off that the president said, okay, fine, we'll postpone. But I'm not. I'm not ticked off, and there's a reason why I see the wisdom in what the president has done. We're also going to hear, you heard Ocasio-Cortez there in the intro lead in, a little bit of that audio. She's going to be running around the country on all the shows. This is a part of who she is now as a sitting congressperson, having the ability to get onto the late night television and get lots of applause lines for outrageous things like tax rates of 70%. And when she goes into the details, she makes it sound so doggone reasonable, but it's not. So we're gonna delve into that. We have Kateline, political commentator, columnist, and talk show host, coming on today. She's going to join us and discuss impeachment and how the Democrats' owned media apparatus has really convinced Americans that this is something that has to happen. Just like we know winter is going to come, and more than likely there's going to be snow, there's definitely going to be cold temperatures, and you come to expect that. And if you don't get that, you're almost a little like it's a mild winter. It becomes a real topic of conversation. Democrats have positioned impeachment as such an inevitability that most Americans are thinking not if, but when. When do they impeach President Trump? So we're going to discuss that. And also, you might have been wondering if you ever watch the clips. I never watch Morning Joe and Mika live, but I do sometimes watch the clips to see what they're talking about, especially since Joe Scarborough calls himself, still to this day, somewhat of a Republican. And so it was with interest that I've noted over the past few weeks, I mean, it's been a significant amount of time that he and Mika have appeared not to be in the same studio. They are, but it took some investigating by the Washington Post for us to figure out that they're in Florida. So we're going to talk about that a little bit and the details surrounding that. I thought it was kind of interesting that people were so flummoxed by the appearance, and there's a bit of a disjointery to their communication on air, and the panels that they have, which previously everyone would be in studio together. And so it's just a kind of a change in their living circumstances for a bit now, and I'm not sure how long it's going to last, but we'll talk about that as well. Right now, I want to get into this thing with Alexandria. She calls herself AOC, so I guess we can all do that. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC. She's asking at what level are we really just living in excess? And she has selective amnesia as to who she feels should be held to the carpet. It's always those evil rich people. But my first question this morning when I was listening to this audio was, well, who is she talking about? And so she talks about certain things that people have, And she tries to connect those things to this so-called evil of having too much. And then she brings in the people, unnamed millions, who have too little, and tries to cobble all of that together. Now, obviously, this is a part of her socialistic practice, convincing Americans that socialism would be better, even though Americans are living at an unparalleled level of wealth and prosperity right now. And to be clear, even for those among us living in our society who are at the very low end of the spectrum and are poverty-stricken, other people in other countries, other citizens of other nations would give anything to live in American poverty. That's why people want to live here, because poverty for us is something millions, over 1 billion people, nearly 2 billion people live in abject poverty across the globe. And those people would give anything to live in what we consider to be poverty. Because in this country, if you're poverty stricken, you can still get assistance from the government so that you can still eat and you can still live. So that leads me to the daily confession, which is coveting. Coveting leads to fraud, and we're not supposed to do it. It's so important to God that it's one of the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments that you hopefully, maybe memorized as a kid. Maybe you have them posted somewhere in your home. Maybe you're interested in the 10 commandments as kind of a foundational bedrock for law, but we don't really pay attention to them as much anymore. But they're super important. And the Bible verse about coveting says, "You shall not covet," which means be content with what you have and don't desire things that don't belong to you. Now, first response from a liberal activist or someone who's concerned with ameliorating poverty would say, so you mean a person who doesn't have electricity or running water or what have you, is living in abject poverty or is on government assistance, that person should be satisfied with what they have? No. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't strive to improve or strive to better your living circumstances. It means that you're not supposed to compare your life to others. So if someone or in the vicinity of has a helicopter pad and a helicopter and you do not, it's not your job to say, well, we need to vote in people who will then take money from that person so they can't have that helicopter pad. Because the weird thing about people who get to that level of wealth, especially when they've earned it themselves, is that they've really overcome so many obstacles. So tax law is the least of their concern. They have people that they pay thousands of dollars per hour to figure out how to shield their money from excessive taxation, to take advantage of the loopholes that exist in tax law, which Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would definitely sign loopholes into any 70% tax scheme. Do you know why? She would do that because her cohorts are in that bracket. I just decided to check. In this next audio clip that you're going to hear, she's speaking with Stephen Colbert. His net worth is $60 million. David Letterman's another reliable liberal progressive. He's $120 million. Nancy Pelosi, $120 million. Elizabeth Warren, $8 million. Cory Booker, who's just getting started, he's worth $3 million. And Kamala Harris, who's running for president, she's worth $2 million. The numbers for the rest of them, the leadership of the Democrats, anyone who's elected, are similar. Save the new freshman incoming class, separate them out because they're just getting started. Everyone else is worth well over $1 million, and many of them multiple tens of millions of dollars. So what does that say to us? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is singing into the wind, but she's not going to stop because she's found a place where she can get claps and adulation. I want you to hear this because there's a certain juvenile nature to the way that she speaks about these things. She's just there so she can be on television, and she's just there to say things that enrage people on the right and get her claps on the left, with no thought to what these kinds of policies have led to in the past. It's number 5.
When we talk about a 70% marginal tax rate, it's not on all of your income. It's on your 10 millionth and $1. So after you make $10 million in 1 year, your dollars after that start to get progressively taxed at a much higher rate. And really what that is that it's the tax interpretation of one answer to the question of how much is, at what level are we really just living in excess, and what kind of society do we want to live in? And do we want to live in a city, for example, do we want to live in a city where billionaires have their own personal Uber helipads when people...
You can get those?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because the traffic in the Lincoln Tunnel sucks.
Yeah.
Okay, good to know.
Now, he's joking around about how you can get those. That's the voice of Stephen Colbert. But obviously, Stephen Colbert knows that you can get these helipads. Obviously, Stephen Colbert he's not flying commercial when he goes to Washington, D.C. or New York or any place like that. He may have to deal with traffic, but he's not driving himself. He has a driver. I mean, when you're at the level that Stephen Colbert is, or the level that AOC is approaching, please help me understand how this woman can logically draw a connection between one millionaire that she doesn't even know having a helipad, meaning a dedicated place on which to land a helicopter, so a parking place for a helicopter with access to then a garage where they can get in a car and travel. How does that connect up to abject poverty and living conditions in wealthy cities like San Francisco, which are completely run by liberals? If Stephen Colbert was even slightly worth even 1/100th of his net worth, Stephen Colbert worth $60 million, he would have said, that's a neat idea, but aren't Democrats already in control of all of the inner cities where the poverty is the worst? Aren't Democrats already in charge of most of the poverty in this country? It operates in areas where Democrats are in control. He could have just said, but so if we deprive 1 millionaire of their helipad and give that money to government, how will the money go through government and get to the people where it's needed? How will depriving some person of their access to a helicopter pad make it possible for more people to come out of poverty? We've spent greater than the amount of our national debt. So it's at what, 20 some odd trillion, and we've spent $30 trillion since we began the so-called war on poverty. And in that time, poverty has increased, meaning able-bodied people are still living in poverty and receiving checks from the government. So these people would be working if they were living in environments in which they were required to work in order to receive pay or food. But since they're not, and they've been trained from infancy on up to believe that they're victims, the natural recourse is to say, I am owed what that man with the helicopter pad has. What he has belongs to me. And so there are just so many, like over 100 million Americans living somewhere in the middle class between 55,000 and 150,000 a year. And they don't give any thought to, there's some rich guy and he has a helicopter pad and I need to take from him. But there are also, the other part of the adult population who are living in America today who truly believe that the only way to fix poverty is to deprive someone else of what they've worked for. And I know one of the things that people like to bring up, one of the responses is always, well, take Donald Trump. His father had money and he gave him a couple million. I don't even remember what it was. It was some large amount of money to start his business, his real estate empire. And he allowed him to take over gradually what the father had, created. But it wasn't as if Donald Trump just woke up one day and he was 19 years old and his dad said, okay, here's a couple $100 million and also here's, part of the business. Donald Trump had been working with his father in the business since he was in high school, early high school. So instead of going out and hanging out with friends, he was in the office with his father, managing their rental properties and learning about the business. So some people would say he was given the opportunity to become successful. And sure, we're all given opportunities, but he earned the money. The father gave him the seed money, and then he used that working for himself to create what he has now. And he's just one example. And what's so funny about Donald Trump being the example of how rich people, they're so evil and they're so horrible, is that generationally passed on wealth is such a tiny percentage of the wealthy people in this country. The majority of the people in this country who are in the 1% got there by their ideas and the sweat of their brow because we live in a country where that's possible. So what's the point of us coveting what they have? Instead, we should toss the Democrats out on their keisters and start implementing the free market so everyone can achieve more. We'll be back with our first guest after this.
who said this: of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, President of America. Also be going to Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown. If you'd like to do both tours or one or the other, that's fine. For all the information, again, June and September, go to spiritualheritagetours.com. We'd love to have you during these 2019 tours.
Hi, I'm Crawford Loritz with a Legacy Moment. Here's a statement to consider. Without sacrifice, there's no Christianity. I'll say it again. Without sacrifice, there is no Christianity. Let's look at the concept of sacrifice. Think back to September 11th, 2001. Think about the courage and bravery of the passengers and crew who sacrificed their lives to bring down United Flight 93 in a field in rural Pennsylvania rather than its intended target. Think of the thousands of American soldiers and sailors in the years since then who have given the ultimate sacrifice in Iraq and Afghanistan. Those sacrifices, as great as they are, pale in comparison to the sacrifice God the Father made. When Jesus inaugurated his earthly ministry, his cousin John was baptizing people. John looks up and sees Jesus coming, and he announces to the crowd in John chapter 1, verse 29, "Behold the Lamb of God who comes to take away the sins of the world." I want to make a couple of observations. Jesus is declared to be God's sacrifice, his lamb. Not a lamb that was created, not a lamb that we're used to, but the lamb from heaven, the one without blemish, the one without spot, the one who came for a divine mission, and his mission is to take away the sins of the world. He wants to take away the devastation. He wants to save us from destruction. He wants to deliver us and bring us back to where we belong. He laid down his life so that we might live. What an incredible message. Well, here's what I want you to remember today. Jesus returned to his Father having accomplished the mission. He gave his life for our sin so that sin would not take over our lives. The question is, what are you going to do with the Lamb of God?
Join Crawford Loritz tomorrow for another Legacy Moment.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the program. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Find us on Facebook at Stacy on the Right and also Urban Family Talk and also American Family Radio. We would love to have you hit the like button or the follow button and keep up with us online. Right now, it's my pleasure to welcome political commentator, columnist, and talk show host Karen Kateline. Karen, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, it's great to be with you, Stacy. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, so I read your piece over at KarenKateline.com, and you're talking about this impeachment. It's like a mantra. It's all over the place every day, every channel that you go on. People are talking about impeaching the president, and they're doing so because, as Joy Behar admitted, it is a fantasy for them. It's something that they just can't wait to see happen. It's all they live for, and that's wrong.
That's true. And I don't know how you feel, but I've been watching this as long as I have. I've begun to think that, along with the many other reasons I've written about, that the Democrats are trying to reverse an election. I somehow think that a lot of the Democrats who had to expend so much energy ignoring and apologizing and covering up for the previous president, I don't think it's an accident that they've accused this president of doing all that he actually did in plain view and more. I don't know. What do you think about that? It's a supposition.
Well, I mean, obviously, there were no investigations into Barack Obama, the president. There was no attempt to remove him from office because everyone was acutely aware that any attempt to do so, even the word impeachment, would bring on waves of racism, because we couldn't even disagree with him policy-wise without people saying, well,
Without
that's
being called a racist.
Right, it's racially motivated.
You know, yeah, well, what we should do is that since you get called a racist for breathing today, which is a great disservice to moral clarity and recognizing when there is racism, it does a huge disservice. But since every Republican in the history of mankind has been called a racist and a bigot, my understanding is that you are black, I'm Jewish, and I'm called racist and bigot all the time for being a Republican. And since we're going to be called a racist anyway, we might as well tell the truth.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't actually give much credence to that because, as I've mentioned before, and I think you probably have had similar experiences being in the public eye, you only have to have one white supremacist email you or go to an event where someone's holding up a sign and you realize that person's an actual racist to understand that racial insensitivity or people being people, people being blunt and not politically correct is nothing compared to actual racism. The actual racism that motivates people who are full of hate, who literally like to kill you, who would probably kill you if they didn't think you were armed to the teeth or there weren't police nearby. That is such a huge difference between what people, the word that they toss to you or toss to me because they don't like our politics. It's just such a huge difference.
Touche. And what is even uglier, but what is coming out and clearer, particularly in this last Covington situation, is that the very people that have been calling us all racist and bigots because we support, and I won't speak for you, many of the policies of Donald Trump.
Oh, I support the president 100%.
I think he's a gift from God.
I do too. I do.
That we are racist. Well, what a lot of that has been, other than to shut us down, shut us up, is to cover up for their own ugly, despicable racism. Who was it who was marching in the Women's March? Anti-Semites, true Jew haters. Look what they threw at the Covington kids when they didn't think that was being videotaped. So what you really have is pure projection and an attempt to cover up for their own crimes by calling everybody else what they're doing, what they are.
Oh, my goodness. So I talk about that all the time, Karen, where they literally, whatever they're guilty of, they just say, no, you're doing that. And when you look surprised, they're like, well, you know you're doing it and you're guilty. And there's no evidentiary support for it. Like, I want to go back to this impeachment thing. So I've been waiting, and the first year of the president's administration, I said repeatedly on the air that now that there was an investigation, pardon me, I just have this weird thing in my throat today. Now that there's an investigation,
I've had that happen. I'm sorry to hear
that.
Yeah,
I know. If there's something, then I would definitely want to hear it. I would want it to be exposed because we don't want someone in office who is guilty of something. And so if the president was guilty of something, I would want it to be brought forward immediately so that we could see what needed to be done. And even though I support the president, I wouldn't want him to get away with breaking the law. Well, we're 2 years in now and still nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pretty sure he hasn't
Not
done
only
anything.
that, but they've been crying wolf for so long. The thing that I have mentioned on various radio programs, like on my own, is that Republicans, you can't possibly fight everything all at once because we're just getting bombarded. But to call for the impeachment of a president that hasn't even been inaugurated yet, as in the case of Maxine Waters, should tell us everything we need to know about what their motivations are.
And remember, she said there didn't need to be an actual law broken for him to be impeached. She said so many things. I mean, if you really want to see kind of a timeline of psychosis taking over someone, where they become obsessed with an idea, you know what I mean? Like the development of a tinfoil hat wearing persona. You can go back to the beginning when she first started talking about it before he was actually inaugurated. And then you can watch over time as she gets into a place where it becomes clear she doesn't have reasoning. So she just starts saying, whenever I say impeach 45, the crowd goes wild. And that's why I say it. We need to impeach him. He needs to be impeached. It's what excites people. People like it when I say it. I mean, I'm not kidding. If you go back through and just type in Maxine Waters impeach, it's crazy.
So it's the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah.
Politicians are so insulated with their own sense of false importance that they think that when they say it, if it gets big applause, it must be true, and they better say it again. We're living in an alternate universe, I think, Stacey.
Well, you know, Karen, I think the alternative universe was actually ushered in with the election of President Obama. But there's something unique about this because it's the same fervor, I found it shocking, the amount of actual literal worship that was given to Barack Obama because of his looks, because of the PR machine that was behind him that would take those images of him walking under a billowing flag, or the images of him and his family, which were undoubtedly, he has a lovely family. I'm not a Maxine Waters. It's not that I can't see beauty or appreciate it in the opposing side, but there was a level of fervor for him that bordered on the maniacal, where you couldn't criticize anything that he did. And so it's like the opposite side of that same coin. Do you see what I'm saying, Karen? It's like people who, there's nothing he can do right. Donald Trump is the actual literal devil. He's the demon from the Midwest. He's orange. He's this, he's that. All of the insults, but it's none of it rooted in, so they hate the wall, sure. But they don't really hate barriers, because all of the people who are advocating against the wall have fences. They have, they're worth millions of dollars. They don't really hate anything that he's proposing per se. They just oppose him because he's Donald Trump and he beat Hillary, and they hate him for it. And it's not about anything he's planning on doing per se. It's not really that. Where we had policy that we hated with Obama.
You're saying so many important things. Among my careers in my checkered past, other than being a professional musical comedy performer, I went to social work school. I went to Columbia School of Social Work, which, interestingly, I was there when Barack Obama was supposed to have been there. It was a big school, so I didn't know who he was, and a lot of people say he wasn't there. Nonetheless, to employ a little bit of psychology here, there's something we used to call, I don't know, still, borderline personality disorder, where everything is all black and all white. And that is not a racial comment whatsoever. It's someone is all perfect or all evil,
right,
and not being able to see the nuances and the individualism of each and every person. And they are perpetuating this. They're inciting this kind of stereotype. Remember when leftists used to say they were against stereotypes?
Yeah.
And now they're creating them. They are wanting people to think in stereotypes, and they would never give Trump an ounce of credit for anything. And that's the real reason why Nancy Pelosi will not give him the wall, because she cannot afford to have him appear to win anything.
Well, there's that, and there's also a level of, so I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I actually thank you. I welcome that bit of, adding in the psychological aspect, because you're right. People don't really talk about that disorder very much anymore, because if they did, a lot of people would recognize it in themselves and they'd change their behavior. So Democrats don't want people to realize that they're behaving like, they're lunatics. But I've seen some of that on both sides of the political aisle. There were people that would be online in the comment sections who were like that about Barack Obama, where he couldn't do anything right. And I opposed almost everything that he stood for as a Democrat, but there were some good initiatives that he had in the mentoring area. And I did admit, which I don't feel like it's an admission, it's a statement of fact that he had a good marriage, and he was clearly a very loving father, and they had a nice family. But that would enrage people, not everyone, but a very small segment of people would email me and say, I can't believe you're giving him compliments. How dare you? He's literally Satan. And I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure he's not literally Satan, but I'm just speaking the truth. Now, on the other side, when you speak of this vitriol towards Donald Trump, and especially Nancy Pelosi not wanting him to win, there's also an element of her saying, you know, I can't believe you used to support me. Remember, he's given money to her previous campaigns, her, Chuck Schumer, all of them. I can't believe you used to be one of us and now you're not anymore. And by the way, how dare you think you can leave us and still survive? And so there's this element of, like, you heard her say recently, like last week or the week before, there are two co-equal branches of government, and as Speaker of the House, I am equal to the president, which you and I both know from Schoolhouse Rock days, that's just not true. That's just not the way government works. There are three co-equal branches.
I don't know if that was a Freudian slip, wishful thinking, or what that was.
What?
But
I mean,
thought that too.
Wait, she's been there so long, there's no way she could believe that, Karen. No way.
Well, I mean, AOC believes a lot of things that aren't true. Can I go back to something, though, Stacey, that you said, if I can? You said something, I mean, so many important issues here. That's the thing. It's hard to keep up. That's the joy of doing talk radio, but, oh, my goodness, there's just so much to comment on. When you talked about, you know, that he was some sort of god, Barack Obama, I mean, there's nothing really new under the sun because that is textbook right out of textbook socialism, where they want to put down religion, people who feel accountable to something higher than themselves, certainly higher than government. They feel, you know, and they are people that feel accountable to God, and those who make the state God, and in order to do so, they elevate the dictators and the leaders into godlike figures. I'm going to take care of you and all of that, which is merely a velvet glove. And then after they accept that, that's when the iron fist in the velvet glove comes out. And I think that is part of what is really going on here, is a giant attempt to usurp the very values, the very principles on which this country has been founded, and turn it into their idea of a socialist utopia, which you and I both know is a socialist hell. It is. It's death and destruction. Hundreds of millions of people lost their lives last century due to socialism, which progressed into communism. And they would not agree with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that all that's needed is for it to be democratic socialism, because that is when it will work. They would not agree. I want to ask you in our last question, because we have about a minute and a half left. Will Kamala Harris, this is a total pivot, and I'm sorry, but I'm just dying to know what you think. Will Kamala Harris be able to reuse the magical cape of wonderment, and, you know, he was our Lord and Savior, and he was all these different things of Barack Obama when he went into the black communities and he got all of the black people to lockstep vote for him, over 90%, and he was able to use that to propel him over any Republican challenger in the presidential election? Will she be able to replicate that? Well, I'm not good at prognostication. I'm going to be watching along with you. I think she will definitely try, because the left always has the same playbook. Now it's going to, first it was a black person, now it's a black female. They knew they wanted a black female because that's all they have is identity politics. Yeah. I think she'll try, and I think it's a race to find out whether Trump has made enough inroads into the black community, because he's made enormous inroads in order to get blacks to realize that they've been on the Democrat plantation. That's our hope. That's my hope, is that they finally have freed themselves from these ideas that the government is going to take care of them, and a corrupt government that has been using them as I don't know, I always think of a football like a, I don't know. I can't think of the word. But anyway. No, I see what you're saying. I kind of see her laying the groundwork, but there's something about her that's different. So he had a charisma, you know, that when he would get before the microphone, he could say almost anything. He could lie, whatever. And the way he would say the things that he was saying was very conducive to that kind of hypnotic atmosphere that the Democrats are looking for. That's why they love Beto O'Rourke, but he just doesn't have what it's going to take. And they do need a minority. Do you think Kamala Harris has it? I don't think she has the it factor. She certainly has the appearance. She's a beautiful person on the outside. But I don't think she has the it factor, because she always sounds like she's cross-examining you. No matter what she's talking about, she sounds like she's cross-examining you. And that's it's grating and it's annoying. She sounds angry.
Yeah,
and
she sounds really angry.
She didn't comport herself well in the Kavanaugh hearings at all.
No, that's audio that should live on in infamy. Karen Kateline, political commentator, columnist, and talk show host. I love it when you come on and join the show. Thank you. We'll be back with more after this.
Can solid teamwork building principles apply to all of life? Here's Tony Dungy, author of The Soul of a Team, with today's uncommon moment.
I've come to see that Nehemiah was a leader who exemplified soul, selflessness, ownership, unity, and larger purpose. An exile who'd become a trusted assistant to a powerful king, Nehemiah gave it all up for the opportunity to return home and oversee the rebuilding of the city walls of protection. Nehemiah also took ownership. After he'd spent months praying about and preparing for his adventure, Nehemiah finally received the king's permission to return home. He led the entire rebuilding effort, recruiting overseers and laborers and overcoming obstacles. In just 52 days, they rebuilt the entire wall, which scholars say was about 2.5 miles long and 40 feet high.
Tony Dungy, best-selling author of The Soul of a Team, from Tyndale House. More at CoachDungy.com.
We want America to be a godly nation.
The Awakening with Bishop E.W. Jackson.
It's never been an issue of race. It's always been an issue of the human heart.
A passion to see America rise and shine like a city that's set upon a hill.
The problem in America has always been sin.
Don't miss Bishop E.W. Jackson and The Awakening. Weekday mornings at 9 Central on Urban Family Talk.
I found myself in jail, too intoxicated to remember what happened that night. Another inmate had mentioned Teen Challenge. I gave my life to Christ, and this is the place that helped me lay a new foundation.
If you or a loved one are struggling with addiction, Adult to Teen Challenge can help. There are centers across the country, and you can find the one nearest you at 855-END-ADDICTION or at teenchallengeusa.com. This is Urban Family Talk.
From America's election headquarters.
Florida's decision to allow 1.4 million former felons the ability to vote has many wondering how the decision could impact future election outcomes. Clarence Office Jr., a military veteran who served a 3-year prison sentence for a drug conviction, is one of those ex-convicts.
As I've gotten older, I see now the significance of being able to vote.
University of Miami Associate Professor Joseph Uzinski says which party benefits at the ballot box is up in the air.
Men tend to vote Republican, but on the other hand, given the socioeconomic status of this group, it could go in the opposite direction, too.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says his main goal is to make sure there's a uniform process in place across the state to implement Amendment 4. In Miami, Alina Shirazi, Fox News.
You can download episodes of Stacy on the Right from the podcast page on AFR.net or UrbanFamilyTalk.com. Now, back to the show on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
We have a society in which there are an awful lot of people who have no idea that Stalin, Hitler, Mao Zedong all came to power promising the same kinds of things that Ms. Ocasio-Cortez is promising, and it led to mass murder, led to dictatorship, it led to genocide. These promises are old promises, and they invariably lead to bad things. The promise of just saying to people, do what you can within the law to make your life better and your family's life better, that system works extremely well. Capitalism is a system that allows people to make something of themselves instead of oppressing other people. It's an incredibly good system. Making money is one of the most harmless things there is to do in the whole world, and that's what our society is about. It's not about ordering people around, putting them in concentration camps. What do you do if a person is a richer person and a poorer person? What do? You take him away? Do you shoot him? Well, that's what the communists tried. It didn't work out very well for them. And in the end of the day, we wound up in Russia with one of the most unequal societies there's ever been in the world. In Vietnam, which promised all these things, we wound up with one of the most corrupt countries in the world.
And he just named off a couple. That was, of course, Ben Stein. I'm sure you recognize his voice. He's so easily recognizable because of the tenor of his voice. And he was talking about how Stalin and Hitler came to power promising the same things as Ocasio-Cortez. And I've really been dismissing her, and I notice a lot of people spend a copious amount of time making fun of the idiotic things that she says and the mistakes that she makes in, like, she doesn't know what kind of government we have. She's college educated, but she doesn't know anything about economics. She doesn't know anything about finance. She's completely inept at, simple tasks that most of us consider to be a routine part of being an adult. But then I went online and I took a look. I'd actually tweeted her yesterday or the day before about something she'd said. And of course I didn't get a response, but I noticed that she has, almost 3 million followers on Twitter. That's the kind of following on Twitter that you have if you are a television star or a movie star or maybe a music star. That is not a typical Twitter following for a member of Congress, especially someone who's only been a member of Congress for a month. The reason she's so popular is because she's attractive, she's young, and she's really she gets out there in a way where she kind of presents herself in this kind of really, you heard the audio, she has this almost youthful presentation that makes people want to give her the benefit of the doubt for getting things wrong. And she's presenting herself as someone who wants to help. But don't all dictators, don't all purveyors of evil come out? No one comes to you and says, so if you agree with me and implement my ideas, you're going to end up poverty stricken, or if you resist, you'll be dead. No one says that. Hitler didn't come to power promising to kill everybody. He didn't come to power promising to invade every country that he could get a foot soldier inside of. He came to power promising prosperity and unity and all the things that people kind of hear and they're like, ooh, that sounds good. It tickles my feely feels. I love the sound of that. But the fact is, we know there will never be a utopia here. And it is up to the adults in this room, the room being America, to take control of this situation. And so before we go into our next subject, and I want to take calls. Let me first give the number out, 866-963-2037, 866-963-2037 if you want to join the program today. I got to say something. We don't get the level of depravity that we have going on in our country without someone who knows better holding back and saying, I just can't, I got too much on the line. I can't. I have too much writing on this. I can't. And we've all been there. Have you thought about saying something to someone and thought, oh, well, I wonder what, she'll say, or I wonder what kind of backlash I'll get? Or have you thought about, hey, this is something that's wrong and I need to say something about it at my kid's school maybe, or in church or wherever. And you have this little nagging feeling that if you say something, it's going to make you not just unpopular, but it might end up with having some negative repercussions for you. Well, first of all, God is your shield and buckler. God is your high tower, your fortress. Under the shadow of his wings, we will find refuge. So there should be no hesitation when we see evil for us to step out and say, not today, Satan, not in my neighborhood, not in my kid's school district, not in my municipality, not in my town, not in my city. You may want that to be the policy, but now that I've heard what evil you're planning for all of us, I'm going to get me 10 friends and they're going to get 10 friends. And between us, we're going to beat you. You are not going to bring that evil here. No, not today. You can bring it here after I'm gone, because as long as I'm here, you're not going to be in charge of me. And that is what we have to start doing. We're late to the party. The party's already in full swing and all the drunk folks are taking over. We've got to get this under control from the perspective of, if you know what is right and you don't tell others what is right, then how does anybody know you know what's right? We are standing by and watching, and the horror that's coming is more of what we saw in New York yesterday. And so many people came on the Facebook page and they were posting about how, their hearts were hurting. And I saw other people on my timeline that I'm friends with on Facebook from across the country crying out, saying, Lord, have mercy. And other people were saying, you know what? Judgment, God, bring the judgment. I used to pray for mercy. Now I pray for judgment. I pray that you bring down the hammer. And if it hits me too, so be it. That's what I saw yesterday. People literally just openly weeping and upset about what happened in New York City. And I talked a little bit about it yesterday. Obviously the numbers, it just doesn't add up that New York, of all places, one of the it's like the haven for abortion there, where in the Black community, more babies are aborted than are born alive. But across the state, they abort about half the pregnancies. So it's like a religion there. And it starts in churches, schools, homes. It starts in that whole idea where your child has made a mistake and you're that family and you have it together. And so that means your child can't be walking around with their stomach poked out their freshman year in college or their freshman year in high school. Your stomach can't be that kid who your kid can't be the one who's going to be pregnant and then a mom as a sophomore in high school. And so the only way that you can prevent that is to send her to live with some relative in a far off distant land, or she's got to have an abortion. And Lord forgive us because we don't want to do this, but we can't have our family be that family. And every time that happens, every time a family says that decision is the one we have to make because we have to preserve our reputation, that contributes to what we're seeing now, which is New York State. It's partially, I want to give them some benefit of the doubt in that, you know, when people are engaging in sin, they have blinders on. And part of what they're doing in New York is they want to stick it to the Republicans, the so-called holier-than-thou Catholics, the people who call themselves Christians, the evangelicals, the ones who want to control what we can do with our bodies and the choices we can make. And so they're saying with this decision, you know, we don't care what we ever said about abortion. What we're saying is we know you're going to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg with some fanatical Christian, some Catholic, some person who doesn't believe in abortion. So we're going to make sure in New York, not only can people have abortions, but they can have all the abortion they want, even up into the due date. And if the baby is born alive, because it's an actual baby that's ready to be born, we can finish it off on the outside of the womb too. And it doesn't have to be a doctor. And it doesn't have to be in a licensed facility. And if some man has raped or molested a teenage girl, this is Planned Parenthood's specialty, helping those guys out. If she gets pregnant and shows up and wants to have an abortion, or he brings her there and wants her to have an abortion, and she doesn't want one, well, abortion wins. She's going to have that abortion. If her parents say you need to have an abortion and she doesn't look like she's into it, oh, we're going to give her that abortion. And there's nothing you can do about it. They have removed all of the criminal elements of forced abortion or coerced abortion. In other words, abortion by hook or by crook, free, down and dirty. We're going to do it, and we're doing it to let you know we're in charge here, and you can't make us. You can change anything you want. You can reverse Roe v. Wade at the Supreme Court. We don't care. In New York, you're going to be watching us do abortions any way we can. Anyone's going to get to do them, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. That's what they're saying. And I tell you what, they're right that there's nothing that I, Stacey Washington, can do to stop it individually. But I certainly will be on my knees in prayer asking the one who can do something about it to bring down the justice that belongs in the face of this scourge, which is people intentionally sacrificing all of these babies who are wanted. We have millions of infertile couples across the country who are desperate to adopt a baby. And these people are actually spreading abortion so that there's no opportunity for that. Not to mention the untold horrors that the women go through after they've actually had the abortions. The psychological damage, the higher rates of suicide, the self-harm and abuse that they go through. It's demonic. What do we have to do? We have to open our mouths. We have to stop sitting by as the church and letting this be the law of the land. It starts with us. And we're not doing what we need to do, and that's why they're getting their way. They won't have it forever, though. Whether we sit or stand, eventually God is going to bring justice in this area. The question is, when he brings the justice, will we be standing with him, or will we be cowering in fear because we know we didn't do what we needed to do? Let's go to the phones. Hey, Devin in Kansas, thank you so much for calling the show.
Can you hear me, Stacey?
Yes, I can hear you. Thanks for calling.
Okay, great. I wanted to address the politician who was suggesting taxing the rich at 70%. The thought that I had was, instead of just entirely telling her to go away, responding with saying, hey, let's discuss making an adjustment. I know President Trump was making tax adjustments early in his presidency. And my thought was that she, just to point out help her see that she's just way too abrupt. But we can address how to help pay off the national debt in states and have a dialogue.
Well, that's the thing. We collect a record amount of taxes every year. Every year we exceed the year before, and we collect a record amount of taxes from American taxpayers, but our debt doesn't go down, and that's because we haven't addressed the spending problem. And so no amount of taxation can tax us out of the hole that we're in with our deficit. We have to address the spending. And I compare it to, there's a little adage, if you're in the whole weight loss world like I am, where you're battling with your appetite for lasagna and ribs and all that stuff, there's a saying that most nutritionists and especially trainers will tell you, which is you can't outwork your fork. You can't outrun your fork. So if you're overeating, no amount of exercise will stop you from either maintaining or gaining weight. And it's the same thing with your spending. If you want to address debt, you cannot address it by bringing in new income if your spending isn't curtailed. And so that is what we're seeing right now. Let's go to Raji in California. Thanks for calling the show.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. I'm what they call African American in California, and I think the Democrats are totally disgusting. I think that they're aborting our children the same way they did in Egypt. I'm also a Hebrew Israelite that's totally disgusted by what's going on with the fake Israelites that was in Washington, D.C., and we believe that they're pro-intellectual. We don't believe that they're actually real Israelites.
Oh, okay. Now, how do you know if you're a black Israelite? Like, how do you prove that?
Well, there's no such thing as a black Israelite. That's something that's created by the media.
Okay.
And we reached out to Tucker Carlson to talk to him, but he won't have us on the show because it goes against their narrative with the people that's in the land of Israel today. We do not hate white people. We do not cuss out children. We don't do any of that. We're against abortion. We're pro-black family, and we actually have white people that are in our church. So we're not against MAGA hats or anything. We think that's just totally ridiculous.
Well, okay, but how do you know if you're a part of the group that you're in? Is it like a genealogy thing, or are you just join the church? Oh, no, it's a church. Okay.
Being a
I wasn't sure.
Being a Hebrew Israelite is like calling yourself an African American. There's no word African American in the Bible on purpose. So when we call ourselves Hebrew Israelites, we're just referring to the nation that came out of the land of Israel that eventually was taken over into America according to the Bible.
Ah.
So they don't want to discuss the Bible. They don't want to discuss the Bible because the Bible unravels their narrative of the people that's in the land today, which the Bible speaks out against, Revelations 2 and 9 and 3 and 9. But we're not the people that's on TV, and it's making us look bad as a society, and it's making us look bad as a culture. We've never had a terrorist attack. We've never attacked anyone. We don't cuss out people. That's the people they see online that actually work for pro-intellectual. They're working for the United States government to eventually aim that and say that the black Israelites are doing this, that, and the other. Because the time for America is coming to an end for the wickedness that they're doing to the indigenous people, to the black people, and also to the white people now.
All right. Well, thank you for calling and for explaining that. We appreciate your call. We are up against the top of the hour, and so if you're in the call queue, hold on. We'll chat with you after this. If you're leaving us now, God bless you from the heartland. I want to thank you for making American Family Radio your home during the day and in the evening and at night and overnight. I love my messages that I get from people who listen overnight. It's a fantastic audience, and we're so grateful to have you. I want to also just really quickly, I'm checking for tomorrow. Tomorrow, yes, so we're going to speak to Cesar Grajales, Director of Coalitions for the Libre Institute, about immigration, and he has an interesting perspective because I believe he's an immigrant. So it's going to be an interesting conversation. God bless. Have a fantastic day. OneNewsNow.com, news and information up next.
Urban Family Talk.
Always stay up to date with the latest in the culture war from the news team of One News Now. Use the One News Now mobile app It neatly categorizes news and articles from the One News Now website in an easy-to-find format. You can read the stories, watch videos, and conveniently share any news story. It's now available for download from your phone's App Store.
Truth, wisdom, empowerment.
Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
For American Family News, I'm Chris Woodward. The Senate has blocked a White House-backed bill to end the partial government shutdown. The vote was 51-47. Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia voted with Republicans, but The Hill reports that Senators Mike Lee and Tom Cotton voted against Trump's plan. Lee is considered a fiscal hawk, and Cotton is one of the more conservative members on immigration. The U.S. has officially requested an open meeting of the UN Security Council this Saturday to discuss the ongoing crisis in Venezuela. President Trump today recognized National Assembly leader Juan Guaido as Venezuela's interim president, leading President Nicolas Maduro to demand that all U.S. diplomats leave the country in 72 hours. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told the diplomats to stay because the U.S. does not recognize Maduro. President Trump is looking forward to his next meeting with the leader of North Korea. Here's Fox's John Decker.
Defending himself against complaints that his negotiations with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un have yielded few steps toward denuclearization, President Trump tweeting, "In a short 15 months, relationships built, hostages, and remains back home where they belong. No more rockets or missiles being fired over Japan or anyone else, and most importantly, no nuclear testing." He continued, "This is more than has ever been accomplished with North Korea, and the fake news knows it." The White House announced last week that the president would hold a second summit with Kim near the end of February and said the location would be disclosed at a later date. At the White House, John Decker, Fox News.
The illegal immigrant suspected in 4 murders in Nevada is due in court today, but not for the killings. Wilbur Martinez Guzman is accused of murdering 2 women inside their homes in Douglas County, Nevada, as well as an elderly couple in Reno. But the 19-year-old El Salvadoran was caught and is being held in Carson City, Nevada, where the DA has charged him with burglary for pawning stolen property. A Connecticut college professor is fired for shouting and giving a Nazi salute during a meeting. Fox's Chris Foster has more.
It happened in November at a meeting about consolidating state community colleges. Charles Mayrick, an assistant business professor at Housatonic Community College in Bridgeport, Connecticut, shouted Sig Heil and did a Nazi arm salute for more than 10 minutes, calling the presentation a farce and a waste of time. The school's president says the investigation concludes that professor committed serious misconduct. Several witnesses say they were already afraid to attend meetings with him before this happened.
And Planned Parenthood really doesn't need the flow of federal tax dollars into its coffers. AFN's Charlie Butts reports that is the view of an expert who keeps the abortion provider under a microscope.
Planned Parenthood in 2017 had an income of $1.46 billion, and the most recent year, $1.67 billion. Of that, $563.8 million came from the federal government. Planned Parenthood also spent the year claiming Congress was trying to defund them, according to Jim Sedlak of the American Life League.
Of course, we all know that Planned Parenthood was out screaming, "The sky is falling, the sky is falling," and so its donors got tricked by that, and they gave them $630 million. So it is absolutely outrageous how much money Planned Parenthood brought in, and the fact is they didn't need it.
That's because its annual report shows the abortion chain made a profit of $244 million after all the bills were paid. It did a good deal more abortions than the previous year, its biggest single cash cow. The number of other services continued to decline.
Their overall services, when you add everything up and include in those services testing, they do Pap tests. Well, even the Pap tests were down last year, and the big one of those tests is tests for sexually transmitted diseases.
That is up. The number of customers was the same as the previous year. The report adds fuel to the debate to defund the organization and let it stand on its own legs, rather than being pumped up by the federal funds.
That's all our time for this hour. Find more news at onenewsnow.com.
I'm Will Addison, Director of Urban Family Talk. We desire to be a movement of time tellers. In 1 Chronicles 12:32 it says, the sons of Issachar were men who had understanding of the time, to know what Israel ought to do. In these perilous times, God is raising up a people of discernment who will see, pray, and act. We sound the alarm as watchmen. We cry aloud that God's people may be activated for his service. Join the movement at urbanfamilytalk.com.
She's sharp, pointed, and insightful. This is Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Look, we're in the business of getting information to the American people, not making stars out of people that want to become contributors on CNN. And that's a lot of times what we see take place in the briefing room.
The State of the Union speech has been canceled by Nancy Pelosi because she doesn't want to hear the truth. She doesn't want the American public to hear what's going on.
We have a society in which there are an awful lot of people who have no idea that Stalin, Hitler, Mao Zedong all came to power promising the same kinds of things that Ms. Ocasio-Cortez is promising.
I want to point out that she's a socialist. She wants 10% tax rates. Those are both accurate, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay.
Democratic, though.
Democratic socialist.
And now, Stacy Washington.
Woo! Welcome to hour 2 of the program. This hour, we're going to speak to Adam Michel. He is a policy analyst in the Thomas A. Rowe Institute for Economic Policy Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Say that fast 3 times. He's been on the show before, and we love hearing from him because he is an economist, a policy analyst, and someone who has an expert view, the long view, on what the shutdown is doing to the economy. And I really want you to hear what he's going to explain to us because it's so common sense, but it's not something that would naturally occur to us to think about as people begin to predict all of this economic slowdown due to the shutdown. Here's a hint. Our GDP numbers include the numbers that come from the government employees, so we don't separate those out. So that's your hint for what he's going to be talking about when he comes on today in the next segment. Right now, I want to go to the phones. Thank you so much for holding on. And if you want to join in, I love taking callers all through the program, except when we have the guests. We don't usually accept calls then. So right now, call lines are open, 866-963-2037, 866-963-2037. Let's go to Dave in California. Hey, Dave, thanks for calling the show.
How you doing? God bless you, Stacy, and fantastic job, and God bless the president. And I just met one of my coworkers in San Francisco Police Department. He's heading for deployment in Afghanistan, so we're praying for him. He's got a 1-year detail there.
Wow.
Stacy, I wanted to say that, you perseverated on abortion, and you're absolutely right. I believe it's the greatest sin that this country has ever committed. The only two heroes that exist are Judge Byron White and Rehnquist in 1973 were dissenters in this abomination and believed that the federal government did not have the right to authorize abortions in each and every states of the union. And the millions and millions and millions of lives that have been lost since then. But I just want to bring them up because they were the only one that had the guts to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And will appear before God in saying that.
Yeah, I want to just, when you say millions and millions, we're well over 60 million people have been aborted in the womb, and we're talking about 18 states worth of people. So imagine 18 states more Americans here. And this is what's so important, Dave. When I say 18 states with Americans, remember, we've increased our immigration numbers to make up for that population loss because people in Washington know we need workers. We need people to come here and live in towns and buy stuff and to be here. We need warm bodies. So since Americans are aborting the babies, they're importing foreigners. And a lot of the foreigners that we're bringing in are fantastic. But we are also allowing illegal immigration for the cheap labor side. And what people don't understand is if we weren't aborting 18 states worth of people, all of those people would be here. Some, through natural attrition, would not be alive. I mean, I'm not saying every one of them would have been just a stellar person, but out of 18 states worth of people, well, who have we aborted? Who have we said, your life's not worth it? Geniuses, doctors, physicists, engineers, innovators. We've snuffed them out before they had a chance to do whatever God had for them to do here. And then we wonder why we have these big, huge, insurmountable problems. Why do we still have such a huge problem with cancer? Why do we not have a cure for that or something that really aggressively takes care of it early on? We're aborting our very treasure, the thing that is going to bring us all of these wonderful innovations. We're just like, you know what, snuff it out. And for people who think it's only poor women who are having abortions, you're so wrong. Abortion is an equal opportunity offender. It stretches its evil hand out and scrapes the lives out of women's wombs, whether they're rich or poor or well-educated or not educated. And we don't actually have a specific part of our society where all of the genius comes from. Some kids, like the man who gave us the iPhone, he was adopted. He came from a broken home, and he still was able to do what he was able to do while he was here on this earth. Imagine if he'd been aborted. We'd only have Samsungs. And I know if you like Samsung, that's like, but still, you get what I'm saying. Thank you for calling the show, Dave. Bill in North Carolina, thank you for calling in today.
Hello?
Hi. Thanks for calling in.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, what you were talking about, like, yesterday and about New York, it upsets me so bad it makes me shake. I mean, they're so wicked, man. Their hearts are darkened. And the first thing I thought, I heard, I was talking to the guy on your program, and he was saying, yeah, they were even cheering and clapping and everything. And I said, yeah, I heard that. And they don't realize, they don't understand when God judges them, it's going to be, I mean, the first thing that came to my mind, Babylon the Great is fallen, whereby all the kings of the earth were made rich. And it said the kings of the earth stood afar off for fear of her burning. Mm-hmm. And my hair is standing up on my arm right now. I mean, it just scares me because they don't realize when God does judge them how bad it's going to be for them. Their hearts are darkened, their eyes are covered over. They don't see it. They don't understand.
No, and we really, I agree with you so much, Bill. I had the same thing. I actually saw the news and I thought, it can't be that bad. Then I read the story about all of the things that were illegal that are now legal in New York. And then I thought to myself, it can't get any worse than this. And then I saw the clip of them applauding and how they turned the World Trade Center pink, which that has, if you think about what happened at the World Trade Center, the World Trade Center towers were taken down in a terrorist attack, and now we have just the one that replaces it, and they use that particular building, not another building, no other building but that one, to celebrate their enshrining of eliminating babies' lives in the womb. It's all connected up. You have to read the book. Oh, geez. I know I say that, and then I'm like, I can't remember what the title of the book is. I will remember it. Obviously, it'll probably be when we go into the break. But it's a book by a Messianic Jewish man who he wrote about the World Trade Center coming down and how God brings his judgment and what it all meant. And it has prophecy in it, and it's just such an outstanding book. And I will get that title for you if you're interested in reading it or listening to it on Audible. And I encourage you, if you're feeling overwhelmed with, she said, read this book, get Audible, the audio downloads, and you can listen while you're doing things, and it really makes it easier to get through a lot of content. So as we were, and I promised I'd tell you about Morning Joe and his wife Mika. They're actually down in Jupiter, Florida, where both of their parents live, and their parents are elderly. And they've been caring for their parents down there, and their house down in Jupiter, Florida actually has a studio in it, but it's not a full-blown TV studio. It's just good for like individual hits. So they actually do the show. They're sitting right next to each other, but they have two cameras because otherwise you would see that they're in a makeshift studio. And she has like a screen behind her that shows Washington, D.C., and he has one behind him that shows Washington, D.C., but they don't talk directly to each other because the camera would have to pan, and then you would see that they each have two different TV screens behind them and that there are two different cameras. So that's what's going on there. They're actually caring for family. A number of media outlets have reached out to MSNBC for comment, and they were not given any comment on it. So obviously it's not an optimal situation. And someone speaking off the record said that it is hard to get the same level and quality of programming done for their program with them down there in Florida doing that. But apparently that's what they're doing, and there's no end date in sight. So that's what you're seeing if you're watching the clips of Morning Joe and you see them each sitting before at what an image that looks like a window on Washington, D.C., you're wondering why they don't have the same window. It's because they're in a individual studio. So now I want to get to the State of the Union address. And I was surprised this morning, I'm not going to lie, when the president came out with his statement saying, okay, so she won't allow me into Congress. She's denying me that. And he said, this is a historic day, and it makes me a part of history that she's done this to me. and I will postpone the address. We're not going to have it somewhere else. The president addresses the nation from the well of Congress, and that is where I will give the State of the Union. And, you know, he's basically giving Nancy her way and giving the historical perspective over to history. So right now we have rancor in our politics, and it's very partisan. But look at how much Republican thought and really intent has changed since the Republicans impeached Bill Clinton. If you're younger, you're thinking, what does that have to do with this? It has everything to do with what happens when some intervening years pass by. At the time, the Republicans were outraged. I was outraged, and I wasn't even a Republican back then, that Bill Clinton had been carrying on this illicit affair in the White House. And even though the original reason that they were investigating him had nothing to do with extramarital affairs or infidelity, once they got on the witch hunt and realized they discovered something horrible, exposing it and bringing him to trial for it was just, the Republicans couldn't resist. And so they did. And the American people paid them back in spades with losses, political losses, and with an overall lowering of the reputation of the Republican Party. And in the intervening years, at conferences and think tanks and all over the nation where Republicans get together and kind of do autopsies and decide, was this right? How did this really work out for us? Republicans across the country were like, we had him, but we would have been better off taking the high ground and saying this behavior is beneath the office of the presidency, but is not the original reason why we investigated you, and therefore we are going to move on and not impeach. President Clinton was impeached, but he remained in office. He didn't step down. I remember the day after they voted to impeach him, I was expecting an announcement that he was going to leave office, and instead he was like, you know what, I'm not going anywhere. We have a record economy, and he just went back to governing. And the American people really had a lot of sympathy for him, not because they agreed with his behavior. Everyone was repulsed by the things that we learned. But people had a lot of sympathy for him because it felt like the Republicans were relishing taking him down and taking the moral high ground. And it just wasn't what Americans want to see in their politics. And I think we're at a place where a lot of Americans may have similar feelings, even in spite of the partisanship. And so anytime the president can, humble himself and take this tack, it doesn't mean he's not going to fight. It doesn't mean he's not going to still win. It doesn't mean he's going to give up on his legislative priorities, or he's going to change his platform or anything like that. He is no more open to Nancy Pelosi's garbage proposals and all of the crap that the Democrats are trying to foist on Americans. He's not any more open to it than he was yesterday. But what he is doing is acknowledging the separation of powers. As the president, as the executive branch, the head of the executive branch, and the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Armed Forces, he still does not have the power to dictate to Congress when they will allow him to address them. His acknowledgement of that is, to me, kind of astounding, because if it were Barack Obama, he would have used his bully pulpit in the media to force the Republicans to allow him to have the State of the Union. The president said he's not going to have it anywhere else. He's not going to go out into the country and have it in like I said, he should have a rally. He should bring it to Missouri. He's not going to do that. He's not going to do any of those things because he's the president of the United States, and the State of the Union is given from the well of Congress, and it's given before Congress to Congress with the invited guests of the First Lady, and it is given to the sitting members of the Supreme Court and other distinguished guests. And so he's saying he will do it in the way that it has been done for time immemorial as a part of what we do as Americans. He's going to do it the way it's always been done. I have a lot of respect for it because a lot of places, news stories out to that, oh, he caved, oh, he gave in, oh, he just this, he just that. And there's a bit of gloating. Weren't we just gloating because he told her she couldn't take a military plane, which was his right as commander-in-chief of the military? And so now she's saying he can't come there until the government is open back up. And we all know she doesn't want the government open because this is a really wonderful place for her to be. But I think the president made the right choice. It's not the choice that I was leaning towards. Obviously, I was all ginned up about him maybe traveling across the nation. And he could still do that, just not for the State of the Union. He's made a clear choice here. I think it's helpful for us to remember that he is the president. And what I would do, because I'm Stacey Washington and I live over here, in the Midwest, and I'm not the commander of anything. I'm the commander of our dog, our Maltese. But other than that, not a commander. So, he's got a different mindset. I think it's the right choice. When we get back, we're going to have Adam Michel from the Heritage Foundation. Stay there.
Here's American Family Association.
To sell to folks to support AFA.
We just want to be able to provide a product that can be used by AFA to support the ministry.
When you wash your family's clothes with Redeem Clean laundry detergent, you can take great satisfaction in knowing that you're supporting the vital work of the American Family Association. It's a unique way to increase your giving to AFA. For clean laundry and support of a cleaner society, it's Redeem Clean. Learn more about the Redeem Clean products when you visit redeemclean.afastore.net.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
I believe the latest government shutdown has been a fiscal preview of financial problems that will hit the government and us in the next few years. I'm not the only one saying this. Kevin Williamson, in a recent column, says the shutdown could be a dress rehearsal for a fiscal Armageddon. Each day we see news reports of government bureaucrats who've had to scale back their spending because they aren't receiving a paycheck. There was even one story about a couple that took back their Christmas presents. But we all know that when the shutdown is over, government employees will receive back pay. These news reports are focusing on what happens when thousands of federal workers don't get their paychecks. Imagine what our society would look like when millions of citizens stop getting checks because the government has run out of money. We aren't there yet, but we're headed there quickly. Total spending on the major entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, will eventually exceed all the federal tax revenue collected each year. And at the same time, the national debt continues to grow. And as interest rates increase, the cost of servicing the debt will go up even if the national debt did not increase. In the best of all worlds, we would hope that our newly elected members of Congress would be willing to address this growing fiscal crisis. Unfortunately, I haven't seen the slightest interest from congressional leaders to reform our long-term fiscal issues. It's easier to ignore the potential problem or postpone any meaningful reform. The next time you see a story about federal workers not getting paychecks, look at the frustration on their faces and multiply it tenfold in order to see what will happen when grandma doesn't get her Social Security check or an impoverished mother doesn't get her welfare payment. That will be a social and economic crisis we have never seen in our lifetimes. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From SkyPass Entertainment, The Least of These, The Graham Staines Story. The Least of These, rated PG-13, in theaters February 1st. TheLeastOfThese.movie.
This is Stacy on the Right with Stacey Washington on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Thank you for being here and for tuning into the program from all over the place. We really appreciate you. And so good to have you here. Right now, it's my pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. It's Adam Michel. He's a policy analyst in the Thomas A. Rowe Institute for Economic Policy Studies at the Heritage Foundation. And he's been on before to kind of break things down for us. And I love having experts on, especially from Heritage. So, Adam, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, let's talk about it. Doom and gloom. Naysayers did they abound? Everyone's talking about how horrible the shutdown is going to be for our GDP and for the economy, et cetera, et cetera. What's the real deal here?
Yeah, so you're right. Everywhere you're reading stories about government workers having to return their Christmas presents or what have you, and that is all true. Like, people that aren't getting their paychecks are struggling to make ends meet. But most of those workers, all federal workers, will get back pay when the government opens again, and so everything will go back to normal eventually. It is temporary pain for those individuals, but we shouldn't expect it to crash the entire economy or turn around all the good economic news that we were seeing before the government shut down. The fundamentals are still strong.
Okay. So I totally, I'm right there with you, because I was thinking to myself, this sounds like the apocalypse, but every time, so I was on active duty during a shutdown, and our credit union fronted all of us the money. Everybody who was banking at the credit union on base got paid like nothing was going on. Now, I was on active duty in the Air Force. It's a little different than working for the federal government, but anyone who banks at a credit union is probably still getting paid. For people who aren't banking at a credit union, you would think if they're not going to take that extra step that they would at least have a month's worth of food at the house, which I'm also really surprised to see federal workers who they make more than the median household income of $56,000 for a family of four. They make far more than that. Why would they not have a month's worth of food on hand, just forget a government shutdown, just because?
Yeah, I think your broader point is really important. Is it's really at the fundamental level, we should be questioning how involved the government is in the economy. If we think that some government employees not coming to work or not getting their paycheck is going to crash the economy, that should be problematic on an even deeper level. The fact that people think we should be even more reliant on the government would make these type of temporary interruptions even more detrimental. That's one of the beauties of small, limited government is we wouldn't have these problems. People shouldn't be reliant on the government for their day-to-day necessities. That should be something that folks are providing for themselves. That you shouldn't have to ask the government for permission to run your private business. You shouldn't. Something like TSA should be privately provided by the airlines, by the airport. You sort of go down the list. I think really what this is highlighting is how over-involved in our lives the government actually is.
So you mentioned that there's just all this discussion about the doom and the gloom and how it points to a need for smaller government. But my thing is I just think about how many multiple millions of people work for the federal government. So we don't really look at that number often. And it's millions of people that work for the federal government, which means if the government's shut down or if there's any threat to the government in any way, their primary concern is to maintain the status quo. So they tend to vote for the party that wants to preserve and grow government. So it's like a vicious cycle that we're stuck in where people who work for the government want to see the government grow and maintain power. They don't want to hear people like you and I talking about reducing the size and scope of government or making government more efficient or reducing budgets or things of that nature.
Yeah, you hit on what I've heard people call the iron law of bureaucracy, and that is that bureaucrats and the bureaucracy that they make up, their main motive is to maintain the size of the bureaucracy and increase the scope of things that they do. And so government is never concerned. The people that work for government are very rarely concerned about how do I do fewer things and allow people to do more things for themselves. Instead, it's always how do I increase the staff that's under me? How do I increase the payrolls of all the people that I manage? Unlike in the private sector where you're measured based on how many people you serve and how much you got prices to come down this year or how many more people you helped. A lot of government statistics and worth in the bureaucracy here in Washington is based on how many people do I manage and how much more money did Congress budget me this year, and all the incentives are pushing towards larger government rather than taking a step back and saying, hey, maybe we should reassess some of these things that we're having the government do.
Well, and I think there's also a kind of, obviously it's natural to want to protect your job, but there's a certain sense of entitlement that comes with working for the federal government because the government doesn't lay people off. It doesn't furlough people. Now, last week, Adam, there was this big story out, and it was covered by a lot of conservative and right-leaning media organizations about the 30-day rule where people are automatically riffed if they've been off from work for the federal government for 30 days and they're non-essential, then their jobs are considered to be reductions in force after 30 days of a government shutdown. I haven't seen that happen. We're on day 34 or 35 now. What's going on with that?
You know, I think that it sort of goes back to that fundamental law that those types of rules may be in place, but the idea that the government could shrink that easily is something only for our imaginations. I think it'll take hard work and dedication to and it's not even to eliminate jobs, but something like TSA, which the government currently funds, that wouldn't be eliminating jobs. It just should be jobs that were more effectively done by private institutions, by the airlines, by the airports. So it's really less a matter of reducing jobs. It's just about moving jobs from the government sector into the private sector.
Well, okay, speaking of TSA, I read a story, and I can't remember where they said that this was, and maybe in Florida somewhere, where it's an airport that doesn't have government TSA. Rather, they have a private corporation that runs their airport screening, and how much more satisfied the customers in that airport are in comparison to customers in airports that are screened by the TSA. We've talked about privatizing the TSA for just ages. That seems like something that a Republican president could get done. I mean, it's not even a discussion point anymore. No one's discussing that.
Yeah, and I think that's a shame. It's ultimately something that Congress also has prerogative over, but my understanding is that local airports have the ability to make that decision you just described and say, hey, we think we can do this more efficiently, make customers happier, do it at a lower cost, get people through lines faster, and they have that option to meet all the same TSA safety requirements, but do it privately themselves. And it would be, I'm surprised that more airports haven't moved in that direction. I guess the problem is that when the government option is heavily subsidized and just sitting there for the taking, it crowds out any sort of private entrepreneurship or innovation, which happens throughout the economy.
Well, and Adam, you know what? While we're sitting here talking, it sounds like we're discussing pipe dreams or unicorns or something, because we can't even get CNN out of the airport. So how are we going to get the TSA out? Like, you know what I mean? Like one battle at a time. If we could just get them to turn CNN off and just play, what's it called? The elevator music? Just play that. Just play, some low-key elevator music with no words, and just play that in the airport, because everybody's got a cell phone and a laptop. So if you want to know what's going on with the news, you can easily find out. And then we wouldn't have to sit there and listen to those people barking about impeachment every time we're in the airport. And I don't even know how to get it done. I've told people, hey, you should, reach out to the people who run your airport. But it's so hard to find the actual number to someone who, it's like we're living in one of those command and control universes where, like, any minute I expect them to come in and force an installation of a television here and turn it on to CNN and leave it on 24 hours a day, and I'm at home. Like, that's how it feels.
Yeah, this idea that it's all gloom and doom, and we're only talking about little incremental steps, or these idea of privatizing something as a pipe dream. All of that there's a grain of truth to it, but I think it's worth remembering all the successes that have happened over the last couple of years. I mean, we're certainly, if you're talking about how this is going to affect the economy, what are we going to go into a recession next year? It's worth remembering that we're not in the world of 2017 or 2007. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act lowered taxes across the board for people and businesses. We're seeing business investment and consumer confidence and jobs and wage growth all trending in good, positive, solid directions. The deregulatory agenda of the Trump administration has really been the unsung story of all the work that they've been doing behind the scenes. That all of these things are going to support a strong and robust economy. And so there is a lot of stuff to focus on that's negative out there, but there's a lot of really positive light at the end of the tunnel as well.
Well, I thank you for reminding us of that and for coming on the show today. Adam Michel, policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, so I'm actually having a sneezing fit here, but I want to, while I take care of that. I want to give you some audio from Sarah Sanders, who's talking about how it's not the White House's job to make stars of CNN wannabes. And what's so interesting about what she's saying is that it's the truth, but most of those in the media feel like it is their job. The reason why the White House briefing room exists is so that wannabe stars, people who want to be CNN contributors or MSNBC contributors, can go in and ask a completely ludicrous left field question and make a name for themselves so that they can get those contracts. And she's saying that's not what she's there for. She's not here for it. Here she is in number 4.
Look, I take questions from reporters every single day. The idea that this White House isn't accessible to the press is absolutely laughable. I've done over 100 briefings, answered thousands of questions from members of the press. I stopped last night after I finished an interview where I took questions and took more questions from a gaggle of reporters standing right outside the building behind me. I'm sure I'll do that again here in a few minutes. The president takes questions nearly every single day from reporters, and we're on call almost 24 hours a day. Look, we'll see what happens. As the president said yesterday, he doesn't like the decorum in the White House. Look, we're in the business of getting information to the American people, not making stars out of people that want to become contributors on CNN. And that's a lot of times what we see take place in the briefing room. We're more than happy to take questions, but we think that there should be a certain level of decorum and a certain level of honesty and responsibility that comes with that.
Does that not make sense? What she's saying is that in any case, the briefings are information gathering and sharing opportunities where she can say to someone, they can ask her a question and she can share. It is not an opportunity to express to her how much you hate her or how much you hate the president. It's not an opportunity to talk about your feelings. It's not an opportunity to whine and complain. And for an example of how their behavior has not changed, if you're wondering, well, I mean, how bad could it be? I will put this on the Facebook page. It's a YouTube video of, I believe it's this morning. Let me just click the little down arrow so I can see. No, this is from yesterday. Kellyanne Conway comes out of, there's an area at the White House, like, so there's the different entry points, and there's an area where the media will they'll do stand-ups so that they have an image of the White House in the background. And they also have a place where they can go inside and kind of keep warm because of the horrible temperatures. And they kind of hang out there because it's a landing zone where people go into the White House and where people come out. And they can catch all of these, these are the people who know the most about what's going on in the White House, cabinet members, staffers, etc. And they catch them and they try to get a comment, get a question in. This is normal. It's routine. So Kellyanne Conway is one of the only ones who still goes out to this particular area. She actually walks out there and stands there, and they have all their microphones pointing at her, and she takes their questions. What I love about Kellyanne Conway, and maybe I'll get a bit of this for you to hear tomorrow, because it's so instructive the way she handles them. She actually asked them questions about, well, why didn't you talk about how Nancy Pelosi lied and said that the reason she didn't want to do the State of the Union was because the shutdown prevented the FBI from providing proper security, to which DHS and the FBI both said, no, we're still prepared. We've prepared for months for this, so we can still do it. And then she pivoted over to, well, the government shut down, so we can't give the State of the Union. So why didn't the media ask her about that? Why haven't they held her to the carpet on that? Instead, they spent a lot of time shouting questions at her really rudely and asking her why the president thought he could just stroll into Congress without having permission to be there. Imagine any person who's a journalist asking about Barack Obama strolling into anywhere because he didn't have permission. Can you imagine that? It wouldn't happen because Barack Obama was black, and there was no way anyone would infer that he couldn't not only walk on water, but walk into any hall of Congress that he wanted to, with or without permission, because he was the first black president, and he was special, and he was also their Lord and Savior, someone they worshiped and bowed down to and scraped in front of, while everyone else just saw him as a regular man who was elected to the presidency. So Kellyanne Conway took them to task about that. But she also said, you're not doing your jobs. You're not asking any of the questions of the other side, which is why no one wants to come out here and talk to you. And so there's been a whole lot of discussion. And you heard Sarah Sanders talk about how many briefings she's given. They're saying she hasn't given nearly as many as any of the previous press secretaries. That's not true. She also hasn't been given the same respect that the other press secretaries were given. she also has not been treated like a human being. And I don't think she's not doing the briefings because she's afraid or she's upset or that she can't handle it. I think it's more about the president saying, I'm talking to these people every time I go out on Marine One, and you're still going on television and I'm still tweeting. And so we still have a working, functioning apparatus here. And as long as Jim Acosta is going to be yelling and screaming and making a nuisance of himself, and we can't keep him out of the room, we might as well just not have the briefings as often. So it's Jim Acosta's fault. Anyway, we'll be back with more after this. Stay there. This is Just a Minute with Stacey Washington. Speaker of the House Pelosi is unwilling to negotiate on any portion of the president's request for border wall funding, even going so far as to suggest that since the government is shut down, the president should postpone giving the State of the Union address. In response, President Trump took the common sense step of canceling the authorization for a military plane for Pelosi's congressional delegation to Afghanistan, Egypt, and Brussels. No one minded Nancy deciding single-handedly that the president should not have his State of the Union, but liberals across the land are wailing in agony over the cancellation of a very expensive trip abroad for the Speaker of the House. Isn't that double standard glaring? It's time for the Democrats, specifically Speaker Nancy Pelosi, to buckle down and negotiate to fund the wall at the southern border. That is what they are paid to do by American taxpayers. I'm Stacey Washington. Find out more at StaceyOnTheRight.com.
One goal is that we're hoping that believers will come to learn more about prayer and more about the vital place it's to have in the life of every single believer.
Pastor Joseph Parker of the Hour of Intercession.
Each and every one of us is called to live a life given to prayer. All of us are wise to make prayer a big part of our individual lives, and we're wise to make it a big part of our life in our families and in our homes.
Listen weekday afternoons at 1 Central here on Urban Family Talk. Chris Brooks.
A lot of parents raised their kids in church and did, in kind of scare quotes, everything right. Mm-hmm. And now they're looking at junior or sis or their son or daughter who's walked away from the faith and said, your God is not my God. And they're wanting to know, what do we do to reach them?
Tuned in to Equipped, weekday afternoons at 12 Central on Urban Family Talk.
Securing America.
They died without family, but 3 military veterans were not alone as people gathered for their burials in Memphis. Funeral director Gary Taylor spoke at a service for soldiers Arnold Kleschka and Wesley Russell and Marine Charles Fox.
We do not forget our dead. We honor them. We respect them. We cherish them.
Flags were gently removed from 3 caskets, folded, and because no family was present to receive them, passed through a crowd of about 700 people.
It's just one of us. It's part of our family.
They didn't have family, and all of us here, even though we don't know each other, we were out here.
The service part of a nationwide effort by medical examiners, funeral homes, and veterans groups to pay for funerals for veterans who have no relatives to claim them. Some have died homeless, others have no surviving family. In Washington, Rachel Sutherland, Fox News.
You can watch a live stream of the show on Facebook or YouTube at Stacey on the Right. Now, back to the show on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
We're building a lot of wall as we speak, a tremendous amount, and we're renovating a lot of the other wall. Otherwise, by the way, with what's coming up, because of the strong economy that we have, we haven't had an economy like this, I guess, in over 50 years. Would you say that's correct, Steve? And because of the strong economy, everyone's pouring up, and we're stopping them. But it's a lot of work. We have incredible people at the border, and you have to thank all of the Border Patrol agents and the ICE agents. I see in Long Island, they don't want ICE. The radical Democrats don't want ICE there because they're too good. They're doing too good a job. And I always talk about Long Island. That's one of the real hotbeds for the MS-13 gangs. And I just see this morning where really radical Democrats don't want them there because they don't want to do anything to disturb MS-13. And when you think about it, MS-13 is about the most violent gang, they say one of the most violent anywhere in the world. And we're sending them out by the thousands out of our country.
Yeah, and that's good news. And what I wish we could see is, obviously there's a lot of opposition to the president and his policies, but I just wish we could see Democrats saying, you know what? Forget partisanship. I agree that we don't need MS-13 gang members in this country. And we are seeing a little bit of that. We're seeing some of these people, coming forward and saying, look, barriers aren't all bad. I don't agree with Nancy Pelosi that barriers are immoral. Some of them are coming out and saying, look, we're not all crazy pants. I actually found a story also on the American Mirror, which I don't go there often, but it was linked someplace else. And I got on here this morning, and they have a piece called Applause Line. Nancy Pelosi repeatedly tells mayors to clap for her. They describe her as being like a mother hen to the America's mayors on Wednesday, telling them when to clap for her. And she says, if there's an applause line, I'll let you know. And then she followed through. She claims that Democrats support strong border security initiatives. Do you want to, let's hear it for border security. And then she raised her hand up, applaud. And she said the American people elected a House majority that would, come on, that's an applause line. And so, and then she said not for everybody maybe. This article says she suffered several bizarre flubs during the appearance at the United States Conference on Mayors. She says, we will strengthen our democracy by passing the Equality Act. That is an act to end discrimination against LGTB community. There are two challenges, well, actually three, that I want to just close with, and that is here they are, she said with a flustered laugh. Suffering a brain freeze, Pelosi said, we have to think in a very drastic way about this. Wrapping up, she flubbed an attempt to connect with the audience. We must embrace innovation, inclusion. We just have to establish your motto that you have put forth here today. We're coming back to it here. She continued, stalling and reading. You know it, hoping that the audience would bail her out of the awkward moment. Infrastructure, innovation, inclusion. So, oh my goodness. I always hope that people will be completely lucid and completely cogent and just, it's so horrible to be public speaking and to flub. If you've spoken in public, as I have, then you flubbed before. So I know how that is. I'm really concerned if she were to have to step down before the end of her term there, who would replace her? Like, oh my goodness, and what is going on with Ruth Bader Ginsburg? What is going on there? So, oh my. So what I'm interested in is just seeing like what can they do to get the Democrats to come back down to earth and start behaving as if they're a part of the government instead of a rogue force trying to, undo the results of the 2016 election. So another piece kind of over at the AP kind of talks about how President Trump ended the showdown with Pelosi and postponed the State of the Union address. And, she did this whole thing where you can't come in. She said that to him after she'd heard that he was planning on showing up anyway. And I've seen a cartoon out there where the cartoon shows the president with his State of the Union folder, and there's a brick wall that's been installed in the doorway of Congress so he can't get in. And I think that's kind of an apt representation of how they want to block him out of government. In fact, I would say that this is exactly what we're seeing, as the president is being blocked out of executing his duties because they just don't want him to be the president anymore. And so that brings me to, and we have a little bit of time. We can definitely take calls here. And someone told me I said the number too fast. I apologize. I am a speed talker. But the number's 866-963-2037, 866-963-2037. I want to give you a little bit of resource here for how we can pray for these political issues. We can pray for the government, especially political and civic issues, using 1 Timothy 2:1. We can ask the Lord to put the person of his choice into office. We can pray the Lord would support and strengthen the person who has been placed in office. We can ask God to inspire leaders to make choices for righteousness. We can ask him to help our leaders have the courage to stop unjust policies, appointments, laws, and so on. And so I want to give you 1 Timothy 2:1. And then I have a website for you after that about downsizing the government. So 1 Timothy 2:1. I urge then, first of all, that petitions, prayers, intercession, and thanksgiving be made for all of the people. And the website that I want to give you so we can kind of get our minds wrapped around what our last guest was talking about. When Adam said, he was talking about, imagining what happens when there is no, it's not a shutdown, the government has just run out of money. And none of us can imagine that because as a nation, we have extraordinary borrowing power because of our GDP. But what if we didn't? What if we couldn't borrow the money? What if all of a sudden it really was? Because when you hear people getting their Social Security checks, you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. It should be no universe in which you cannot get your Social Security check because you paid in for that. It's one thing for people who are getting welfare checks. They didn't pay in for that. So getting that money, that's a bit of a, it's like a roll of the dice. But the money you paid in, this is the irresponsibility that we have going on in our government right now. So the website is downsizinggovernment.org. And they have a blog, and then they have information put together about commerce, agriculture, defense, education, energy, health and human services, homeland security, housing and urban development, interior, labor, social security, transportation, and other agencies and programs. They have charts for you to look at where you can see how the spending has gone up precipitously no matter what party is in office. Small businesses being held hostage by the shutdown. Winners and losers in the state form, in the form of a state, which states are winners and losers from centralized government. And they have an article here about pay for federal government workers. And this is all recent content, January 18th, the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. These posts are from. And you can click at the top and get straight to the spending charts, which will show you where the money is going. And so, what I hope for is that people would understand that if we ever got to a place where people weren't, there's books about this. 6 Seconds After, that's one of the books that we read for book club a few years back. And in that book, it talks about an EMP blast going off over the United States, which God forbid, we have to pray that would never happen. But when it does, the people who keep everything running are no longer able to keep everything running, namely the prison wardens and those who keep everyone who's incarcerated behind all of those, electronic doors. If there's no power, those electronic doors don't work. So people who are being held in are now suddenly free. So you have roving bands of criminals going all over the country. And then you have people who live in poverty-stricken areas, but they're getting welfare when their card doesn't work anymore and the grocery store has been ransacked and there's no food in there and trucks aren't moving because all of our cars are now electronically controlled. So if there's an EMP blast that fries those electronics, the car doesn't work. Now, for people who have older cars that are not predicated upon electronics, those cars would still work. But the majority of our cars are these little electronic marvels that everything in it is controlled by a little computer. And so you have no cars working, no trucks working, no deliveries being made, you have no electricity, the power grid is down, and then people who are in areas where, they're traveling outside their area to get food. Now they don't have electricity, they don't have food, they don't have money. So they just start en masse leaving those areas and going out to where they know there is food. They assume there's food in places out in the suburbs, that the suburbs still have power and still have food. And they get out there and the suburbs don't have power. and they don't have food, and everyone's armed. The people who aren't armed are at the mercy of those who are, which is why I go back to something I mentioned to Adam, and obviously that's not his purview as an economist and policy analyst over at Heritage, but it behooves all of us. You are not running your household correctly as a woman if you don't have 30 days worth of food at the house. I'm talking about dry goods and water. If you don't have that for your family, 30 days worth, what are you doing? You shouldn't be drinking lattes, getting your nails done, doing anything but working on getting 30 days worth of food at your house. Then you go beyond that. Are you really comfortable with just 30 days? If you are, fine. But if you're not, what are you doing? So, because that's how I just can't begin to explain how shocked I am that government employees who make a good living, most earning far more than Americans in the private sector, would need to go to food banks or not be able to pay for their necessities. You're earning all of that money and you don't have 2 weeks worth of food at home, the first missed paycheck, and you're all out of food, and you're in a food bank, which thank God for the food banks, and definitely, but what about your backup plan? You haven't signed up for Instacart, so that you can deliver groceries, so that you can make enough money to buy gas and keep everything running until the government shutdown's over. Here's what we know. It's going to be over. And the Republicans have already voted twice to pay everybody while the shutdown is going on. And when it's over, they're going to vote to give everybody back pay. So it's a temporary condition. So I'm not judging. I'm just saying we've got to be better than that. Got to be better than that. We have to have some food at the house. We have to have some provisions so that our families can rest in the fact that, hey, government shut down, but we still have to go to school. So we can still pack our lunch, and we can still, catch the bus to school or do whatever, and we can still function until the government's open back up. Having a little bit of money set aside for this kind of eventuality. You don't have to have 10 grand set aside, but you need to have enough to make your mortgage payment and to, do a little bit of grocery shopping and buy gas and keep your electric bill, paid and your gas bill paid. If that's not the case, that is a super high priority, whether you're a government worker or not, to have those things in place so that you're not at the mercy of what has become really the situation in Washington, D.C. is volatile. And every chance the Democrats get, they're going to be exerting any power that they can get their hands on to subvert the president's agenda and to make life miserable for anyone who is within the vicinity. That means people have to be prepared. So I just encourage, first of all, get some kind of gig economy job. You can be driving for Lyft or Uber. You can be doing some of everything and earning money in the interim. And when everything gets back to normal, get those stores set aside. And there are so many websites. One of the best websites for figuring out how to set money, or not money, but set aside provisions for your family is run by the Mormons, because the Mormons keep huge provisions of stores of food for their family when they're, pardon me, all of them are required to do that by the church. And so they have a place where you can go and buy food that's really, it's packaged for storage. And they have a way that you can buy a little bit of food every time you go grocery shopping, and within a certain amount of time have all the stockpiled food that you need in order to keep your family from ever being in a position of starving or anything like that. It can be done. And I know if you're already prepared, or you have 90 days worth of expenses set aside, you're probably thinking, how could you be going over this? It's clear that this information is needed, because look at how many people are literally, they're on TV in line getting food from food pantries and talking about how they're afraid they're going to starve to death, and it's only been 2 weeks since their last paycheck. That's not what God has for us. No way. All right. I'm going to take my sinus impaired self off into other regions of my home to try to figure out what's going on. And I want to say God bless you and have a fantastic evening. Straight from me to you. Thanks for being at home at American Family Radio, and we'll be back with you tomorrow.